Hey guys, tonight we're not curling up with lace doilies or peeking into princess towers. No, tonight we're trudging across a windswept fjord in damp wool, the salt stinging your cheeks and your braids stiff with ice. You've slept on straw, eaten dried fish, and survived childbirth twice. But despite all that, you are powerful. Why? Because tonight, you hold the keys. Literally. They hang from your belt in a clinking bunch, cold iron against your thigh. They open the granary, the ale chest, the family lockbox, and they symbolize something most women across medieval Europe could only dream of: ownership. You probably won't survive the winter storms, or that grumpy sow in the byre, but you will survive your marriage contract. And that, in this world, is rarer than a sunny day in Trondheim. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your local time and location in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your name might be Sigrid, or Thorbjorg, or maybe something with 6 consonants and a strong smell of sheep. Whatever it is, it's carved into the edge of your wooden chest, right next to a rune representing ownership. This chest, like your comb, your cloak pin, and your wedding ring, is yours, not your husband's, and everyone knows it. Viking society is weirdly progressive, not because they read feminist theory, but because practicality demanded it. When your community stretches thin across harsh terrain, every adult counts, and you, as a woman, are expected to run the farm, keep accounts, arrange feasts, and negotiate with neighbors, especially when the men are away, pillaging. I mean, trading. The keys on your belt? They aren't just symbolic. They mark you as the manager of the household economy. You control stored grain, cloth production, and even small livestock. When guests arrive, it's your word that determines which cheese wheel gets served. When someone needs a loan, they come to you. Historians still argue whether this key symbolism was consistent across all Norse cultures, or whether it's mostly tied to Icelandic and aristocratic households. But even the most skeptical agree. Viking women had legal agency in property and marriage transactions in ways that shocked later Christian chroniclers. And that belt of keys? It had real legal weight. If your husband tried to sell your goods or spend your dowry without your consent, he'd be dragged to the thing, the local court, and publicly shamed, or worse, fined in silver. Here's a quirky detail. Women's keys weren't universal. A young woman might carry a single key to her personal coffer. A wife got more as her responsibilities grew. A widow? She might rattle like a smithy when she walked. The more keys, the more clout. But don't get cocky. You're still in a world where muscle often wins the argument. If a dispute arises over property, and the men of your family are dead or away, you'll need to speak well and carry a good reputation, and maybe a cousin with a sword. Still, in a Europe where most women couldn't even inherit land, you're off to a decent start. Your name appears on land grants. Your seal might be a carved fish, or a copper ring. And when you walk into the longhouse, people step aside, because a woman with keys is a woman who controls winter survival. You know the rhythms of barley planting and lambing season. You know which of your sheep has a limp and which one keeps stealing turnips. You decide when the farmhand gets paid, and whether the loom will be used for linen or wool this month. Your role is part matriarch, part CFO, part medieval project manager. And the younger women? They watch you. They see the way you stand with your back straight, your keys displayed like a sheriff's badge. They whisper about you in the yard, wondering how you negotiated your bride price so well, or how you managed to hold on to that field your late husband's brother tried to claim. 'Cause here's the truth. Your keys didn't come for free. You argued for them. You worked for them. You defended them in court and at the hearth. You didn't just inherit power. You forged it like a blade from cold iron. And when you sleep, you keep them nearby, just in case someone tries to unlock your world without permission. You're standing beside a smoky hearth now, the scent of singed wool mixing with yesterday's stew. Your fingers fidget with the edge of your apron, but your mind is sharp, because today is no ordinary day. Today, your father is negotiating your bride price, and it's your future on the table, not just a wedding feast. Forget what you know about dowries. This isn't a matter of giving money away to marry you off like an unwanted goat. This is business. When you marry, he pays for you. Your family might provide household goods or livestock as part of the arrangement. Sure, but the key point is this. You bring assets into the marriage, and you keep control over them. That's right. Viking marriage is less about hearts and flowers and more about farms and boundaries. You are an economic agent, a stakeholder, and your marriage is a partnership, or at least a joint venture with very clear terms. The bride price, called the munder, isn't a gift. It's a signal to the community that the groom's family recognizes your value, and it's not pocketed by your parents either. Often, it's earmarked for you. It can be a plot of land, silver coin, or even a share in a ship's earnings. Romantic? Not really. Empowering? Absolutely, right? And don't forget the morning gift, morgengifu, a separate payment given after the wedding night, traditionally by the husband directly to the wife. If that feels transactional, well, that's because it is. But guess what? You can keep that gift even if the marriage ends. It's yours, legally binding, signed off in front of witnesses, and enforced by the thing. Historians still argue whether this two-tier payment system was consistent across all Norse regions or mainly an elite practice. Some sagas show poor farmers making token bride prices. Others have land deals that rival modern mortgages. But the custom is rooted deep. And here's the fun part. If your future husband doesn't pay, the marriage isn't valid. No gold, no go. You're not his property. You're not sold. You're contracted. And contracts require payment. Picture this. Two families standing on a muddy patch of land, arguing over how many cows equal a daughter who can weave 5 cloaks in a week. A local law speaker recites legal phrases from memory. You stand silently nearby, trying not to fidget. When the final terms are spoken, there's a pause, a nod, then a clink of silver in a wooden chest. You've just become half of an economic alliance. Still, it's not like you get to choose entirely. Your father or brother likely drives the negotiation. But don't underestimate your influence. If you're clever or loud, you can make sure the right kind of deal is struck. Some women are known to have refused matches, especially if they suspected the groom had debts, or was too attached to his sword and not enough to his goats. And remember, you keep what you brought. Let's say you had 3 sheep in a patch of flax field when you married. 10 years later, if the marriage dissolves, those sheep, or their value, come with you. So does that flax field, and any profit it's generated, unless otherwise agreed. And yes, there were often contracts written, on parchment, on carved wood, or committed to memory and witnessed by 3 free men. A quirky tidbit, some women included a clause allowing them to leave the marriage with their saddle, their cloak, and the chest they brought, which may not sound like much, until you realize that chest might contain the entire household's winter supply of dried cod. Your wedding itself? Simple. Really. A feast, some witnesses, and maybe a carved stone or god post to bless the union. But behind that simplicity lies a network of legal obligations. If he mistreats you, cheats on you, or just refuses to provide support, you can walk, and the munder doesn't go back, because he already spent your good years. Modern scholars love to dissect these contracts, and debates rage about how evenly the rights played out across social classes. But even conservative interpretations agree. Viking marriage gave women far more legal standing than most of Christian Europe for centuries. It's not perfect. You can still be pressured or manipulated, but the system doesn't treat you as invisible. You are a visible, audible, valuable part of the marital equation. Tonight, as the fire crackles low and the cold creeps in, you lie in your new bed beside a man who smells like dried fish and ambition. But under your pillow, you keep a small scrap of wool, a reminder of the cloak you brought with you. Your cloak, your land, your terms. The fire hisses on the hearthstone, and outside, the frost is sharpening its teeth, but inside your chest, tucked beneath your wedding beads and spindle whorls, is a small pouch of silver. It's yours, untouchable by your husband, and tonight, you're thinking about using it. Because this marriage, it's officially done. You've tried. You've argued over goats, over gossip, over who gets to name the third son. You've cooked his food and patched his cloak, and yet he drinks too much mead, kisses the merchant's daughter behind the smithy, and last week he knocked your favorite comb off the shelf in a rage. That's the last straw. So tomorrow, you'll stand up in front of witnesses and speak the magic words that Viking women have used for generations. I divorce you. That's right. You can end the marriage yourself. No priest, no male guardian, no dramatic legal petition. Just you, 3 free witnesses, and a loud voice. It's not even that complicated. Under Viking law, there were several legal reasons for divorce, and women had full rights to initiate. If he abuses you physically, disappears for too long, fails to provide for the household, or cheats, you can leave. If he moves your belongings without permission, that's grounds. 2. Yes. Seriously. Historians still argue whether this was more common among elite landowners or whether farm wives in remote valleys truly had that same power. But sagas and law codes alike preserve dozens of examples of women walking out and taking property with them. A fringe detail? The most dramatic form of divorce involved announcing it in 3 locations: the threshold of your home, the marital bed, and the public assembly, the thing. This triple declaration left no doubt, and no legal room for him to argue. And guess what? You get to keep your mourning gift. You also reclaim your original property, your dowry chest, and any profits you made that weren't legally shared. The house? That depends. If it was yours before marriage, it's still yours. If not, you may negotiate a portion or move back to your family's stead. A quirky story. In one saga, a woman divorces her husband by walking out during a feast and declaring in front of everyone that she's done washing his underpants. Legal, if a bit soapy. Of course, it's not always clean. If there are children involved, custody can get messy. The law often favored the parent with better resources, sometimes the mother, sometimes the father. You might keep the youngest, while older boys go to their father to train as warriors or learn trade. But one thing's clear, you are not trapped. Viking marriage was never permanent by default. It had legal structure, but not unbreakable chains. In fact, a broken marriage was sometimes seen as a sign of a poorly matched alliance, not a personal failure. There's even evidence of remarriage clauses. Women who remarried could bring the same property into the next union, and often leverage their experience and assets for a better match. You've already seen what doesn't work. Now you get to choose differently. And if your ex-husband complains, tough luck. The law supports you, assuming, of course, that you did everything properly. No storming out in the middle of the night without witnesses. Viking law likes things orderly. Even chaos should be documented. So tomorrow morning, you rise early. You braid your hair neatly, wrap your shoulders in your best cloak, and gather your witnesses. You speak the words, and you walk away, your keys still jingling on your belt, not out of shame, but out of sovereignty. The next night, you sleep in a bed that's colder, but quieter. You light your own fire, cook your own stew, and realize something strange. You miss nothing about him, except maybe his cousin who knew how to sharpen knives. In the morning, you go outside and check on your sheep. One is limping again, but that's your sheep, and your choice. And as the wind picks up across the hills, you tug your cloak tighter and stand straighter. You are single. You are not disgraced. You are not alone. You are free. You kneel beside a boundary stone, pressing your palm flat against its lichen-covered side. The wind flutters your cloak, and somewhere behind you, the cows low lazily. This isn't just a rock, it's a marker of ownership, and it's yours. Your husband didn't buy this farm. You inherited it. Your father gave it to you when you married, part of a deal sealed with handshakes and roasted lamb. It came with 3 milking cows, a dozen chickens, and a slightly terrifying goose who answers to no one. The longhouse was sagging even then, but it's your name that neighbors speak when they refer to the good land by the stream. And yes, they do say your name, not his, because Viking women, unlike many of their medieval sisters elsewhere in Europe, could own land in their own right, not just as caretakers, not just as stand-ins for male relatives, but as legitimate, recognized, documentable owners. You sign contracts, you pay taxes, you hire laborers. You may not always plow the fields yourself, but you hire the lad who does. And you absolutely know how to judge whether he's working hard enough or just admiring the way his reflection looks in the watering trough. You manage land, which means you manage wealth. Historians still debate how widespread these landowning rights were for non-elite women. Did every dairymaid in Norway have a parcel in her name? Probably not. But the laws on the books, the sagas, and the rune-inscribed stones all suggest that ownership by women wasn't rare. It was expected in many families. A mainstream historical fact worth remembering. In Iceland's Graga's law code, a woman could inherit land if there were no brothers. And if she married, that land didn't become her husband's. It remained hers, unless explicitly merged. Even if she died, the property could pass to her daughter. Imagine that. A chain of women holding the same field across generations. Long before most European women could own anything more than a hairpin, you keep records, maybe not written, but memorized. You know which hill is yours, which stream marks the edge of your pasture, and which idiot tried to move your fence 3 feet last spring. You dragged him to court and won. He still avoids your gaze in the market. And this isn't ceremonial ownership either. You pay the landnam, the tax on settled land. If you fail to pay, the land can be challenged. If someone tries to graze their goats on your hill, you can take them to the thing. And if your children marry poorly, you can withhold land as leverage. A quirky tidbit: some women gave land to monasteries, only to reclaim it in return for prayers or favors, a sort of spiritual subletting system that let you control your land while pretending to be pious. And let's talk about widows. If your husband dies, peacefully, we hope, and not via axe to the back in a fjord feud, you don't just inherit his share of the land, you take charge. You're now the undisputed head of the household. In fact, widowhood could be a woman's most empowered stage. You no longer need to consult anyone before selling that stubborn patch of barley field. You can shift laborers, restructure debts, or even marry again, though honestly, why mess with a good thing? And you know what else? You can lease out land. You can enter into contracts with tenants. You can oversee trade routes that cross your property. One merchant needed permission to move goods along a riverbank you technically own, and you made him offer a barrel of smoked fish in return. You didn't even like fish, but you liked the power. Some men hate this. They mutter about uppity widows and women who think they're jarls. They try to draw new boundaries, scribble new lines. But you just show them the landmarkers and the witnesses. There's something satisfying about watching a man's face fall when he realizes the fields he's arguing over aren't his to claim. That big barn on the ridge, your grandmother built it. That orchard behind it, you planted half those trees yourself. And if someone wants to change that, they better bring more than just bluster. Because here's the truth. In Viking society, land is power, and you've got both. Tonight, as twilight wraps the hills in soft purple, you walk the boundary lines once more. Your boots sink into soft moss. Your fingers trail along the fence posts you had rebuilt last spring, and your thoughts are quiet, but firm. This land is yours. And as long as you breathe and pay your taxes, it will stay that way. You're squinting into the storage shed now, trying to count how many barrels of dried herring you've got left before winter really kicks in. Your fingers tap against the frame of the door like an abacus. 1, 2, maybe 12 if you scrape the bottom. This isn't about fish. This is about assets. Because you, Viking matron extraordinaire, aren't just a landholder. You're a businesswoman, and a canny one at that. The chickens in your yard, the wool on your loom, the ale, brewing in the dark corner of your hall. That's capital, and you know how to make it stretch. We often imagine Viking men off raiding and bringing home loot, but the real, steady wealth of a Norse household didn't come from plunder. It came from management, and much of that, frankly, was your job. You oversee sheep shearing and wool dyeing. You monitor the quality of the beer. You negotiate with traveling merchants over salted butter prices. And when the fish are packed and sealed for export, it's your seal that gets impressed into the wax. That's your brand, not your husband's. In some Icelandic settlements, you might even own a share in a ship. Yes, you, a woman, with a slice of longboat equity, a cut of the trade, a vested interest in whether the voyage to Dublin brings back silver or heartbreak. Historians still debate how common ship shares were for women, and whether this was limited to widows and heiresses. But enough. Contracts. Survive. To suggest it wasn't unheard of. Women? especially wealthy ones, diversified, land, livestock, textiles, maritime trade. Your portfolio is more robust than a saga hero's sword collection. And speaking of textiles, let's talk about wool. You don't just spin thread for household needs, you produce cloth for export, real economic output. The warp-weighted loom stands tall in the corner of your hall, a monument to domestic power. Iceland, in particular, was so reliant on woven wool that it became currency. Your weavings might be sent across the sea, traded for spices, wine, or iron. A quirky fact: there's evidence some women branded their textiles with specific weaving patterns or knots, essentially early trademarks. Your cloth might be known by the tightness of its weave or the deep indigo of your homemade dye. You're not just a weaver, you're a brand. And taxes, oh yes, the thing men know you well. You pay your dues in goods or coin, just like any male landholder. You appear on tax rolls and property registries. You might not carry a sword, but your name carries weight. Of course, all this wealth requires record keeping. Maybe not with ink and parchment, though some elite women likely did, but with memory, tally sticks, oral contracts, and witnesses. You know who owes you 10 dried lambskins. You know which neighbor still hasn't returned the iron pot. And you remember exactly how much you paid for that lazy farmhand who somehow manages to fall asleep during sheep watching duty. A woman's wealth is visible in what she wears, too, not just her cloak pins or jewelry, but in the keys she wears openly. We've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. A woman with keys is a woman with control over stored goods, valuables, and household economy. You may not wield a sword, but you wield a chest full of accounts, and the power that comes with them. And your daughters? They learn at your knee, not just how to spin or churn butter, but how to assess the market, which merchant overcharges, which field yields best, which cousin is likely to default on a loan. You teach them to be sharp, and polite, but sharp. You might laugh about it in the evenings, while mending tunics by firelight, but you know this isn't a joke. In a society where survival depends on supply, the woman who manages the goods manages the fate of the family. There are limits. Of course, you can't command a warband, you won't be elected law speaker, though one of your granddaughters might try, but when the long winter settles in and everyone waits for the thaw, they eat the food you stored, wear the cloaks you spun, and drink the ale you brewed. And if that isn't power, what is? Tonight, before bed, you check the chests, you smell the barley ale, check in its fermentation, you prod the sheep for signs of parasites, you count the sacks of salt, you run the numbers silently in your head, and then, only then, do you let yourself rest. You don't dream of battle, you dream of a spring market, where your cheese fetches twice the expected price, and the merchant from Hedeby says, "That's the best wool I've seen all season. Who wove this?" You smile. "I did." The silver chest creaks as you open it, the lock clicking beneath your thumb. Inside, beneath carefully folded linens and a pouch of caraway seeds, lies your reputation, not in the form of gold or grain, but in something even weightier in Viking society: honor. In this world, your name is currency, and your honor is collateral. The clang of keys on your belt echoes through the longhouse as you cross the threshold. They're not for show. They guard the most precious things you possess: the storage rooms, the family's valuables, and, perhaps most symbolically, your good name. Everyone watches the keykeeper. If you squander goods or let mold into the barley barrels, it's a scandal. If you're caught locking away love letters from a rival's husband, even worse, because being a powerful Viking woman means walking a delicate line, authority and virtue, hand in hand. Unlike the image of meek medieval wives and convent-approved silence, your status comes with voice and visibility. You host feasts, you direct servants, you mediate disputes between neighbors, you even speak at local gatherings, albeit carefully, with that sharp wit tucked behind a modest veil. Historians still argue how public a Viking woman could be without courting backlash. In some communities, women appeared regularly in legal proceedings. In others, too much visibility could lead to whispers, or worse, accusations. And that's the dangerous thing. For all your legal power, your reputation is fragile. Take the saga of Gudrun Osviforsdottir. Beautiful, clever, and widowed more than once. She navigated Viking law like a barrister, but even she endured gossip, slander, and suspicion. The more powerful a woman becomes, the more closely she is watched. So you guard your reputation like you guard your salt stores, carefully and with vigilance. You watch what you say. You never let debts linger. And you never leave your chest unlocked when guests are in the house. A quirky detail: some Viking women embroidered their name or initials into their linen, an early form of watermarking. Subtle, but effective. No one forgets who owns the fine tablecloth at the feast. And you're not above strategic kindness, a gift of smoked meat to the law speaker's wife, an extra loaf to the widow whose son helped with the fence. These aren't just acts of generosity, they're investments in goodwill, in alliances, in keeping your name clean. Your household is your stage. When guests arrive, they take in everything: the fullness of the grain bins, the neatness of your hearth, the quality of the ale, the arrangement of furs in the sleeping loft. Every detail speaks for you. And if something's out of place, so is your image. And yet, you don't strive for perfection, you strive for control. Because here's the truth: Viking society is deeply social. Disputes are settled with words before they're settled with swords. If your neighbor challenges your boundary stones, you don't grab a spear. You grab your witnesses and your receipts. And let's not forget your chest. That box in the corner of your hall is more than storage. It's a vault of identity. You might keep marriage contracts, carved rune sticks, precious amber beads, and the odd blackmail-worthy letter, which you definitely don't read out loud when you're bored, unless he deserves it. The chest is yours. It came with your name carved into the lid, passed down or gifted when you married. If someone else opens it without your permission, it's a violation of privacy and of social trust. And if someone steals from it, you take them to court, and no one questions your right to do so. And the keys? Always visible, always within reach. Some say women wore them not just for convenience, but as a public signal. I control what matters. One saga tells of a woman who refused to pass her keys to her daughter-in-law until she could prove she knew how to store fish properly. Another describes a mother-in-law jingling her keys loudly when annoyed. Power has a sound, and in your case, it's iron against wool. You don't just run a household, you run a legacy. Tonight, after the fires die down and the children are asleep, you sit quietly on your carved bench, hands resting in your lap, keys cool beneath your fingers. Outside. The dogs bark once, then fall silent. Inside. The chest stays closed. The latch is firm. The lock unbroken. Your house sleeps. Not because you're tired, but because you've made it safe. There's a new stillness in the longhouse. No boots at the door, no coughing in the sleeping loft. Just you, and the weight of absence. Your husband is dead. It wasn't dramatic. No Viking duel, no flaming ship on the fjord, just a cough that wouldn't quit, and a fever that whispered louder than any skald's song. And now, the fire burns alone in the hearth, and your cloak smells like grief. But here's the twist. You don't fall into ruin. You rise. Because in the Viking world, widowhood isn't a downgrade, it's a promotion. When your husband dies, you don't become invisible. You don't get shuffled off to a nunnery or absorbed into your son's household. You become the head of the estate. The keys you once wore as wife now carry new weight, and people look to you. You inherit, not just the dried fish and debts, but the property, the contracts, the decision-making authority. If your name wasn't already on the land title, it is now. And if anyone dares suggest otherwise, you'll meet them at the thing with your seal ring and 3 witnesses who've known you since your flax-spinning days. Historians agree that Viking widows held significant legal rights, far more than their contemporaries in Frankish or Anglo-Saxon lands. Some managed estates, others took over trade ventures, a few even led expeditions, although that might have had more to do with stubbornness than legality. A quirky tidbit: widowhood was sometimes the only time a woman could truly act with full independence, signing contracts, settling disputes, making bequests, and even founding religious sites, especially in later Christianized periods. And now that you're in this stage, you feel it. The quiet respect in the eyes of the blacksmith when you renew your tools. The shift in posture when the tax collector realizes he has to answer your questions. The young women who glance your way when marriage negotiations are mentioned, wondering if they'll get to hold their own keys someday. Of course, you mourn. You fold his cloak. You light the oil lamp by his grave mound. You whisper stories over the smoke of dried herbs, just in case the gods still listen. But you also balance the accounts. You assess the livestock, count the barrels, review debts owed and favors pending. You renegotiate trade routes. You send word to your cousin in Hedeby about that cargo deal your husband left unfinished. You remind people, politely, firmly, that business goes on. And you don't have to remarry. There's no pressure, no legal compulsion. If you want to stay single, keep your lands, and grow old with your wool and your wit, you can. No one's rushing to marry off the woman who controls the region's winter ale supply. But if you do marry again, let's say a bold trader with decent table manners, you do it on your terms. Your property remains separate unless you explicitly merge it, and if this new husband thinks he's getting control of your best pasture without negotiation, he's got another thing coming. One saga tells of a widow who married a younger man, only to keep him on a sort of probationary lease. 3 years. Renewable by mutual consent. Progressive? Sure. Petty? Maybe. Effective? Definitely. Even the church, as it creeps into Norse lands, can't fully erase your role. Priests might raise eyebrows, but they still accept your tithes. And when they need land for a new chapel, they come to you, not your sons, not your brother. You. Widowhood also gives you a chance to teach. You gather your daughters and nieces, show them how contracts are carved, how silver is weighed, how to listen for the lie in a merchant's smile. They learn not just how to tend a hearth, but how to protect what's behind it. And late at night, when the wind creaks through the roof beams and the embers glow soft, you sit beside the chest. You open it, slowly. Inside are the contracts, the seal ring, a few love letters, some sweet, some slightly illegal, and the brooch you wore on your wedding day. You don't cry, you nod, because your husband is gone, but your power is not. You rise before the sun, slipping out the longhouse door with a linen veil tied loosely around your head. There's no fire to tend this morning, no ale to brew, just the quiet, satisfying truth that you don't owe your time to anyone, because you, dear listener, are single and, strategically so. In Viking society, unmarried women are not shameful leftovers from the bridal shelf. You're not locked away or pitied. You're independent. Whether you're young and not yet wed, divorced and thriving, or widowed and uninterested in a second round, you exist legally in your own right. You can own land, sign contracts, attend court, and even sue your neighbor if their pigs have trampled your carrot patch. Again, you're not half a person waiting to be completed by a husband. You're a whole legal entity. With teeth. This might sound radical, but Viking law codes back you up. In many regions, a woman reached full legal majority by age 20, at which point she could manage her own property without a guardian. Try finding that in most of medieval Europe. Historians still argue how strictly this was followed in practice. Some believe fathers, or male kin, still had informal control, but the legal texts suggest a clear path to autonomy, especially if you had property, especially if you were loud, and loud you can be. You go to the market and haggle without apology. You lend money to a traveling tanner and demand collateral. You negotiate with a cousin over boundary lines, and when he tries to talk over you, you tap your boot, just once. He shuts up. A quirky fact? In some parts of Norse culture, women who remained unmarried past a certain age could declare themselves a kind of self-woman, självfrädikona, literally, a woman with her own rule. It sounds like a social media bio, but back then, it meant freedom, and you use that freedom wisely. You're not waiting around for a man to expand your livestock operation. You hire help, you make deals, you plant extra flax and invest in an iron pot you've had your eye on. You even flirt a little, because why not? Your neighbors notice, some with curiosity, others with envy, a few with mild suspicion, because an unmarried woman with resources and no man to guide her, that can feel like a glitch in the system. You get offers, of course, marriage proposals wrapped in flattery or practical appeals. You'd be safer with a man around. Think of the children. I have a really nice pig, but none of them offer anything you don't already have, except maybe more laundry to do. One saga tells of a woman who refused all suitors, lived with her sisters, and outtraded half the village. She was known for sharp eyes and sharper bargains. No one dared call her spinster. They called her Mistress of the North Meadow, a title she earned and kept. You've got similar energy. You're not reckless. You're measured. You manage risk the same way you manage your cheese aging schedule, with patience and sniff tests. You're not waiting for someone. You're choosing, and sometimes choosing no one. And here's the kicker. Unmarried women could be guardians themselves. If your brother dies and his children are young, you can be appointed to oversee their estate. The law doesn't say find a man. It says find someone competent. That someone, it's you. You sit at the thing beside male landowners, listening to arguments about property, inheritance, and animal theft. You add your voice to a case, maybe not as loudly, maybe not as often, but when you speak, people listen, because you've got skin in the game. No husband means no buffer, no shield, but also no tether. You make your own mistakes. You fix them yourself. And when success comes, and it often does, it's yours alone. Tonight, you return to your longhouse after checking on your barley fields. The cat whines between your legs. You light the oil lamp. You eat stew by yourself, not because you're lonely, but because you're at peace. And as the fire crackles low, you add one more iron key to your belt, the one to the new storage chest. It jingles softly as you move, just enough to say, "I own this, and I own me." You sit at a carved oak table, fingers stained with soot and beeswax, as you trace the grooves in a small wooden rune stick. Your name is etched into it, not with a flourish, but with intent, because tonight, you're not just weaving cloth or counting goats. You're about to seal a contract in a world without pens, paper, or legal Zoom calls. Vikings get creative with their paperwork. You might record a deal by carving runes into a stave of ash wood, or you might twist silver wire into a particular knot to signify agreement. Sometimes, you simply call in 3 witnesses and have them recite the terms aloud, then hope they don't all die of dysentery before next season's court date. And you? You know all of these tricks. Because as a Viking woman with property, you're also a player in the world of legal documentation. You've seen your mother do it. You've done it yourself. From marriage contracts to trade agreements to inheritance arrangements, you've formalized and recorded deals in ways both clever and surprisingly consistent. Some households even had a designated chest. Yes, that chest again, for legal tokens, rune sticks, marked beads, braided silver bands, and more. A mainstream fact. Many Viking-age societies used oral contracts supplemented with physical tokens or symbols to validate legal transactions. These were recognized at the thing and could be challenged in disputes. And women, especially widows and heiresses, were not just allowed to participate in these systems. They were often central to them. A quirky tidbit? In some areas, deals were signed by passing a piece of land's turf from one person's hand to another. Yes, a chunk of dirt was your receipt. Imagine buying a house today and walking off with a baggie of sod in lieu of a mortgage agreement. But make no mistake, these symbols mattered. A twisted silver wire might represent a share in a ship. A carved stick might detail how much wool is owed each winter. And if someone tried to fake or tamper with one, that was fraud, and it could get them fined or exiled. You keep your records close. A small coffer beneath your sleeping bench holds rune staves detailing which cousin owes you dried fish. A knotted cord in a leather pouch represents the grain lending agreement with the family across the fjord. You remember the details, but you also back them up, Viking style. And let's not ignore the role of rings. Not just jewelry. Rings served as seals of authority. A woman with a ring of estate, often inherited or gifted by her father, could use it to approve contracts or transactions. No wax seal necessary, just the ring, the reputation behind it, and a knowing look. Historians still argue how widespread women's use of rings as legal markers truly was. Some point to high-status burials with elaborate rings and suggest they weren't just decorative. Others think the practice was limited to elite circles. But in sagas and poems, women with rings are often depicted as decision-makers, not just decoration. You wear one yourself. A thick bronze band with tiny knotwork at the edges. It's not flashy. But when you place it on the table during negotiations, people pause. They know what it means. You've signed deals with it, broken engagements with it, ended feuds with it. Today, you're negotiating a grazing rights agreement. Your sheep keep wandering onto the neighbor's land, and instead of building a ridiculous fence, you propose a shared pasture and rotating schedule, 3 witnesses, 1 carved stick, 2 exchanged brooches. Done. The man you're negotiating with scratches his beard. You're as sharp as a broken comb. Woman, he mutters. You smile sweetly, but at least I know how to untangle knots. You're not writing history with parchment. You're writing it with memory, metal, and mutual respect, or at least strategic leverage. And everyone who does business with you knows better than to forget the terms. Because if they do, you'll show up at the thing with that rune stick and an attitude. Tonight, you polish your seal ring with a bit of wool grease. You tuck the rune staff back into your chest. You mark the new cord with red dye to distinguish it from the blue one. Each symbol, a promise. Each item, a story. Each deal, your will in wood and wire. You don't need ink. You've got memory. And an excellent filing system under your bed. You stand at the edge of the pasture, watching two brothers argue over who gets the larger share of a sheep herd. Their voices rise like gulls in a storm, but you say nothing. Yet, you already know the answer, because in this family, you're the one who holds the will. Inheritance in Viking society doesn't follow a neat line from father to firstborn son. It's more like a braided rope, tangled, complex, and often surprisingly inclusive of women. Today, the question isn't whether you'll inherit something, it's how much. Because your father didn't just leave behind fields and livestock. He left a legal riddle, and you, daughter of grit and goat smell, are ready to solve it. Here's the setup. Viking law allows for daughters to inherit, especially if there are no sons. And even when sons exist, daughters often get a portion. The exact split varies by region, social class, and time period. But the underlying principle is this: you count. A mainstream fact? In the Icelandic Grogas law code, women could inherit up to 1/3 of a man's estate if there were sons, and up to 1/2 if not. If no male heirs existed, a woman could become the full estate holder. And unlike some societies, Akitai, her claim couldn't be easily overridden by uncles or second cousins with louder voices. Of course, this leads to situations like the one you're in now. Two male cousins claim the same flock. You, meanwhile, have a written token, a rune-carved panel, faded but legible, that clearly states your father intended the pasture to pass to you. My eldest child, Svala, of sound mind and steady hands. Historians still argue whether these clauses were always respected or if women had to fight harder to enforce them. But sagas are full of women going to court, invoking lineage, and emerging with deeds in hand and a glint in their eye. You wait until the cousins tire themselves out. Then, calmly, you show them the panel. You recite the words. You present two witnesses, both elderly, both slightly deaf, but extremely enthusiastic. And just like that, your inheritance is acknowledged. A quirky tidbit? Some women buried copies of inheritance tokens inside family burial mounds, just in case someone tried to challenge the record later. You're not that paranoid, yet, but you do keep a backup rune staff in your grain bin, just in case. Inheritance isn't always about land. It might be a brooch, a ship share, a prized spindle, or a recipe for the only mead that doesn't taste like fermented regret. These objects carry value, economic, social, even mystical. Take your aunt's comb. It's made of whalebone, inlaid with amber, and ugly as sin. But it's known throughout the valley, and it's been passed through 4 generations of women who refuse to marry men with bad breath or unpaid debts. You treasure it. You also keep it in a locked box. No one touches the comb. And then there's strategic gifting. Sometimes, women gift land or valuables before death to avoid inheritance disputes. That's legal. That's clever. That's how you manage to get that south field early. because your mother had opinions about your brother's judgment and an impressive talent for legal loopholes. Of course, not every claim goes smoothly. You once spent 3 market days arguing with a distant cousin over a spinning wheel. You won, not because you shouted louder, but because you remembered that it had a scratch shaped like a fish, evidence that couldn't be faked. Because here's the truth: Viking inheritance isn't just about bloodlines, it's about memory. Who remembers the promises? Who kept the records? Who shows up with proof and poise? And you? You show up prepared. Tonight, the cousins leave grumbling but subdued. The sheep stay put. The pasture remains under your care. You write a new rune panel, just to be clear, and store it in your newly reinforced chest. The key goes on your belt. You didn't steal your birthright. You claimed it, with clarity, with calm, and with the kind of knowledge that only comes from watching, listening, and planning for years. Because in a world of loud men and short tempers, the woman who documents everything is the one who wins. You can hear the bells before you see the priest. They jingle faintly beneath his robes, a soft, metallic sound that doesn't quite match the heavy footsteps of his entourage. They're bringing books, incense, and something far more disruptive: new rules. Because Christianity has arrived, and while it claims to offer salvation and eternal peace, what it really threatens, for you, at least, is your legal independence. You're suspicious from the start. The monk's eyes linger too long on your uncovered hair. He talks a lot about modesty and obedience, and not once does he mention how to balance a ledger or settle a land dispute. You let him preach. You nod politely. Then you go home and triple-check your contract stash. This isn't just a religious shift. It's a cultural earthquake. Because the church doesn't like what you represent. A woman who owns property, speaks at court, initiates divorce, and carries more keys than a monastery gatekeeper. A mainstream fact: as Christianity spread through Scandinavia in the 10th and 11th centuries, it brought with it new marriage laws, many influenced by Roman and canon law, which emphasized male guardianship and discouraged female autonomy. Viking legal customs didn't vanish overnight, but they started to bend, and then, over time, to break. You feel it in small ways first. The priest won't baptize your child unless your husband is present. You're told your oath in court counts for half that of a man. The bishop frowns when you mention leasing a pasture to a younger woman without her father's approval. And then, most ominously, there's the whispered suggestion that women shouldn't speak at the thing at all. Historians still argue how quickly Norse societies lost their female empowering customs under Christian influence. In some regions, traditional laws lingered for centuries. In others, especially those closely tied to European church networks, the change was swift and severe. You resist. Of course, you and many like you. Viking women weren't passive in the face of clerical pressure. Some adapted, hiding their contracts in prayer books. Others wielded their influence in new ways, donating land to churches for favorable treatment or founding nunneries where they set the rules. A quirky example: a 12th century Icelandic woman named Thuridr founded a chapel on her land and staffed it with her unmarried sisters. No bishop dared interfere. You take notes. But the tension builds. At market, you hear talk of a new law proposed by a Christian convert. A woman's land must pass through her husband's line after death. To protect family unity, they say. You roll your eyes so hard you nearly drop your fish barrel. You attend the thing anyway. You wear your keys, your seal ring, and your best cloak. You speak, briefly, clearly, and with 3 witnesses standing behind you like silent oaks. Your neighbors still listen, for now, but the pressure is real. The church pushes the idea that a woman's place is under male authority, first her father's, then her husband's, then her son's. They frown on divorce, scoff at women giving legal testimony, and even question the propriety of female landholders. You, who have lived your entire adult life wielding contracts and chasing down stray goats, are now being told to retire quietly and pray. You do pray. For patience. For the strength to not hurl a beeswax candle at the next priest who suggests you give your keys to your nephew. But you also act. You rewrite your inheritance documents. You call in debts early. You tutor your daughter-in-law codes instead of psalms. You whisper to your neighbor, an equally irritated widow, about starting a shared trust to protect women's holdings. She nods slowly, the firelight dancing in her eyes. Because here's the truth. You see what's coming. A slow erosion of the freedoms your foremothers fought to carve out in a world of cold soil and colder politics. But you're not done fighting yet. Tonight, after the bells have faded and the priest has long returned to his quarters, you sit by the hearth, you open your chest, you touch each rune stick, each ring, each marked chord, and you make a vow, not to the gods or the saints, but to yourself. You will not vanish. You will not be rewritten. You will document everything, because they may try to change the laws, but you remember what came before. You're walking through the frost-bitten fields just past dawn, your boots crunching through old snow, your braid tucked deep in your hood. A raven watches you from the fence post, head cocked, feathers ruffled. You nod at it, not because it's magical, though you're not ruling that out, but because it respects you. You are a woman of means. You are a woman of property. You are a woman who never picked up a sword, and yet your name is spoken with the same reverence as any shield maiden's, because Yudacha, dear listener, don't win battles on a battlefield. You win them with influence, with assets, alliances, and the terrifying power of land deeds that outlast lifetimes. And yet, when people speak of Viking women, they often imagine the sword swingers, the ones with braided hair and blood-spattered armor, striding into legend beside their brothers. But here's the thing. You don't need a sword to wield power. You have a loom, a ledger, and land. Mainstream history gives us glimpses of the Shield Maiden, the mythical warrior woman of Norse poetry and saga, and while scholars still argue whether these women were common, rare, or purely literary fantasy, one thing is certain: their presence in the cultural imagination left a deep mark. But so did yours. You're the woman whose name appears in legal records, the woman whose property lines are still referenced 3 generations later, the one whose dispute over barley taxes in year of the great snowfall is still cited at the thing as precedent. A quirky fact: some sagas actually portray powerful women as more dangerous than warriors, not because they fight, but because they outthink their enemies. Take Un, the deep-minded, who sailed to Iceland, claimed land, and established a dynasty without once drawing a blade. You admire her, you suspect you might be her, and yet the warrior myth persists. People expect you to be loud, physical, armed, when in truth, your power is often quiet, strategic, and far more lasting. Think about it. What's more powerful, a sword that rusts, or a grazing contract that shapes a village's economy for 50 years? When you walk into the marketplace, you don't swagger. You don't need to... People know your boots, your cloak, your soft voice that can, with one phrase, reroute a trade route or end a boundary feud. When you do raise your voice, people stop to listen because they know you only speak when it matters. And yet, there are still whispers. There's always someone who mutters that women with too much land forget their place. That independence makes you unnatural. That maybe, just maybe, you're meddling in things best left to men. You smile. You've heard it all before. You've outlived 3 husbands, 10 market judges, and 1 very unlucky sheep thief. You're not afraid of whispers. You're afraid of poorly documented contracts. The irony? The very same men who criticize you often rely on your judgment. When there's a property dispute, they come to you first. When the spring floods wipe out a fence line, you're the one who remembers where the original markers were. You are, quite simply, essential. And your daughters? They see this. They see that power can wear a cloak instead of armor. That influence can be carved in wood instead of stone. That you don't need to be a warrior to be immovable. One day, a young woman from another settlement will visit. She'll sit beside your hearth, drink your ale, and ask, "Were you ever tempted to take up arms?" You'll laugh. You'll hold up your spindle in one hand and a deed in the other. I never had to. Because while the sagas sing of shield maidens, your legacy is stitched into land, law, and lore. They might not chant your name in battle hymns, but they cite you at the thing. And that, in Viking society, is immortality of the most practical kind. Tonight, as the wind taps gently at the shutter, you sit by your chest. You place your keys beside your spindle. You breathe deeply. The house is quiet, and outside, the raven is still watching. You nod again, because you are no myth. You are no side character. You are the reason the roof still holds. You're standing by the cattle pen, sizing up a red-faced farmer who smells faintly of onion and desperation. He's just offered his son's hand in marriage. Again, you've declined. Again, but this time, he's come with a new incentive. 4 goats, a sack of barley, and shared grazing rights. Tempting. But you've played this game before. Because marriage in Viking society, it's not about love. It's about negotiation. And sometimes, it's closer to a livestock deal than a love story. You squint at the goats. They're scruffy, stubborn, and one of them looks like it bites. You sigh, because here we go again, trading husbands like horses. Let's get this straight. Viking marriage is transactional by design. And unlike later romanticized Christian notions of sacred, lifelong unions, Viking unions are practical, negotiable, and dissolvable. You don't marry for poetry. You marry for property, alliances, and productivity. A mainstream historical fact, marriage among Norse people was a private contract, often between families, and formalized with witnesses and bride price agreements. It could be annulled, dissolved, or renegotiated, and women had a say, especially if they brought property to the table. You, for example, own 2 pastures, a storage barn, and a weaving operation that produces the finest cloaks in the fjord. You don't need a husband. But sometimes, a husband is useful. He might come with horses, or sea connections, or the kind of shoulders that can haul firewood without complaining. But if he underperforms, legally, financially, emotionally, you can dissolve the contract. You've done it before. You'll do it again. That's the system. And it's surprisingly fluid. Historians still argue about how frequent remarriage was, but the sagas are full of examples. Widow remarries traitor. Divorcee marries warrior. Marriage ends over infidelity, laziness, or sheer annoyance. No one clutches pearls. They just recalculate a quirky saga tale. One woman, unhappy with her third husband, simply walked into the thing, announced that he eats too much and smells worse, and left with her goats and her dignity intact. Iconic. And it's not just about leaving, it's about redefining the terms. You've seen women demand new bride prices if a husband inherits property mid-marriage. Others insist on renegotiating grazing rights when they bring more cattle into the union. You once knew a woman who made her third husband sleep in the guest barn until he repaid a debt to her cousin. Bold. Marriage is flexible. It adapts to changing fortunes. If your husband goes bankrupt, you can shield your assets, especially if you made a smart contract. If he gets rich, you might claim a larger share, especially if your cloth business helped him gain favor with the local chieftain. You might even try a trial marriage, 1 year, renewable, if he doesn't ruin the stew or insult your loom work. The sagas don't record every experiment, but Viking women clearly knew how to test before investing. There's also strategic matchmaking. You might marry a younger man with trade connections, or an older one with no heirs, just long enough to inherit his land. Does that sound cold? Maybe. But you're playing the long game, and don't think men aren't aware. They treat you with caution, especially if they've heard about your divorce speech at the spring thing. You have a reputation. You once rejected a suitor mid-negotiation when he tried to include access to my hunting dog in the bride price. You like dogs, but not that much. Marriage isn't sacred. It's structured cooperation, with the option to exit. Your neighbors might joke that you change husbands like you change shoes, but they also come to you for advice, because no one negotiates terms like you. You've got a mind for clauses, a memory for numbers, and the charisma to make a man offer a ship share and his best oxen. Tonight, you stir stew for one. You hang a new curtain in the sleeping loft, not because anyone's moving in, but because you might invite someone, someday, or not, because at the end of the day, you're not trading your peace for a slightly better goat. You're not marrying down out of loneliness. You are not a prize. You are a participant, and if that farmer shows up again tomorrow, he'd better bring better goats. You sit by the fire, flipping lazily through a stack of shipping tokens, flat, notched pieces of bone and wood, each one representing a share in something that's far, far away. A crate of butter in Hedeby, a cask of ale in Jorvik, 2 crates of dyed wool on a ship bound for Dublin. You sip your mead and smile, because the wind may be howling outside your longhouse, but your wealth is sailing across the sea. You've never left the fjord, and yet you own goats in Greenland, salt in Shetland, and half a shipping chest full of Irish linen. That's not fantasy. That's property abroad. And you, my friend, are a Viking woman with international assets. It sounds grand, but really, it's just good business. You weren't born into this. You built it. Your first husband was a trader, gone for weeks at a time. You learned fast. You watched him haggle, inventory, invest. And when he died, tragically, stupidly, in a bar fight over fermented herring, you took over the accounts. Now, you're the one negotiating contracts with merchants, not in person, perhaps, but through tokens, messengers, and clever use of kinship networks that span half the North Sea. A mainstream historical fact. Viking-age trade networks stretch from Newfoundland to Baghdad. Norse women, especially widows and elite householders, often participated in these networks by controlling goods, extending credit, and managing property at a distance. They didn't need to board the ship, they just needed to own what was in it. Historians still debate how formalized women's roles were in long-distance trade. Some argue they were informal partners behind the scenes. Others point to legal records and archaeological finds, like women buried with foreign coins or imported goods, as signs of active, documented participation. You know your role. You invest. You coordinate. You own. You once gave your niece 2 goats as a wedding gift, but secretly retained the rights to their first offspring. Now, those goats have kids, and those kids have kids. They're grazing somewhere near a fjord you can't even pronounce, but they're yours, marked by a carved ear tag and a witness agreement from a merchant who owes you a favor. A quirky fact? Some Viking women had their own branded merchant seals, small rings or bone stamps used to mark ownership on crates or contracts. They weren't common, but they weren't unheard of. You've got one tucked in your rune chest, a coiled serpent biting its own tail, a symbol of eternal return on investment. And don't forget property through marriage. If your daughter marries into a family in the Faroes, and they inherit land or livestock, you might retain secondary rights, especially if you contributed goods to the marriage. You're not just sending her off with linens, you're planting assets in foreign soil. You hear stories, of course, of women owning guest houses in coastal towns, of widows managing toll rights at river fords. One distant cousin even owned part of a coin-minting venture near a monastery. She couldn't read the Latin inscriptions, but she understood profit margins. You're not chasing adventure, you're anchoring it. And when things go wrong, when a storm hits, or a ship is late, you manage risk. You diversify. You never invest more than 1/3 of your spring profits in any one route. You once sold off your entire ale surplus ahead of a predicted barley blight. Your neighbors called it luck. You called it reading the wind. Tonight, you mark a new token with red ink. 12 barrels of soapstone headed to the east coast of England. A cousin is overseeing the delivery. You trust him. Mostly. You've also written a secondary contract naming a backup recipient in case he gets himself exiled again. It happens. You place the token in your chest, beside the others. Each one a placeholder for something real, something far away, but fully yours. Then you tuck the keys beneath your pillow. Because while other women dream of weddings or warriors, you dream of coastal markets and exchange rates, and in the silence of your longhouse, the firelight flickering across your seal ring, you smile. Let the men chase dragons. You're chasing dividends. You're standing in the crisp morning air, arms crossed, jaw tight. A neighbor's boy just let his cows trample your barley field. Again, this is the 3rd time. You've had enough. So, you pull on your wool cloak, call for your witnesses, and march toward the assembly grounds. The thing is in session, and you've got a case to make. Because in Viking society, justice is public, vocal, and, contrary to popular belief, not just for men. You don't carry a sword. You carry a woven pouch of evidence, a marked stick, 2 written statements from landholders, and a particularly damning hoofprint on a piece of dried turf. It's not dramatic. It's procedure. The thing is part court, part parliament, part town square. It's where disputes are aired, laws recited, and agreements made under the open sky. And yes, you are allowed to speak here. A mainstream fact. Free women in Viking society, especially those with property, could appear at the thing, present arguments, and bring legal cases. This was not some secret loophole. It was part of the social contract. Land-owning women, widows, and even daughters of prominent families had standing. Historians still argue about how often women actually did speak at the thing, and whether male relatives often fronted for them. But the law codes and sagas offer examples of women suing for stolen livestock, inheritance disputes, and yes, trampled crops. And you're a seasoned pro. You stand tall as the law speaker calls your name. You make your case with clarity and calm fury. You mention the previous warnings. You show the hoofprint. You gesture toward your witnesses, one of whom is your sister-in-law, who remembers everything and forgets nothing. Then comes your favorite part, listening to the excuses. The boy was tired. The gate was open. The cow is rebellious. You wait. You nod. And then you respond with a quote from last year's barley tax ruling. You brought the exact ruling carved onto a wooden panel. No one expected that. The crowd murmurs, not with disapproval, but with admiration. You're not the loudest voice, but you're the most prepared. A quirky tidbit? Some sagas describe women clapping or snapping their cloaks at legal assemblies to punctuate points. Why, you've never done that, but you've considered it. And the verdict? The boy's family owes you compensation in the form of 3 sacks of grain and 1 woven rug. The rug part was your idea. You like the mother's weaving. She won't be thrilled, but she'll survive. More importantly, you reinforce your place. You're not a background character. You're not a quiet widow hiding behind her sons. You are present, active, and known. And when you speak, you shape the law. Because law isn't written on stone tablets. It's carried in the mouths of people. And you are part of that mouth. Of course, you've lost cases too. Once, over a disputed fishing spot. Another time, when your witness fell asleep mid-testimony. But you learned. You adjusted. And now, you win more often than not. And here's the deeper truth. Just showing up matters. Every time you speak. Every time you walk into the thing with your keys in your pouch. You make it harder for anyone to argue that women don't belong there. You are building precedent. Slowly, steadily, with dried turf and carved sticks and iron will. Tonight, as the sky dims and the court closes, you return home. The cows are back in their own pen. Your barley, well, what's left of it, is safe. The rug payment is due in 7 days. You've already chosen a space on the bench for it. You remove your cloak and hang it with care. You place your pouch back into the chest. You take 1 deep breath and let the day go. You don't shout. You don't threaten. You speak, and the land listens. You sit on your bench, darning a sock with more holes than wool, when a knock rattles the longhouse door. Outside stands a man you don't recognize, broad shoulders, thick boots, and an uneasy grin. He bows. You must be the woman with the land near the South Stream. You nod. You've heard this tone before. Polite, rehearsed, a little too careful. And then comes the phrase you've been waiting for, that tired little insult hiding in Compliment's clothing. You're not like other women, because when Viking men are uncomfortable, they often default to calling you a troll. Not the bridge-lurking, child-eating kind, though, honestly, that might be preferable. No, they mean it metaphorically. Troll woman. Sharp-tongued. Too powerful. You've heard them all. You keep a running tally. You smile at him anyway and invite him in. Because this isn't your first time handling a man who's trying to figure out whether you're a business partner or a mythological threat. In Viking society, when women accumulate land, wealth, and a spine, they sometimes become unsettling. A mainstream historical fact, Norse sagas often portrayed powerful, outspoken women as both admirable and dangerous. They were wise, clever, and skilled, but frequently accused of witchcraft, manipulation, or being other troll women, seeresses, shapeshifters. It was a literary way to tame their power by making it unnatural. Historians still debate whether this was cautionary or celebratory. Were these stories warnings against female authority or grudging odes to it? The answer, predictably, is both. You felt it. You've stood at the thing and had your arguments dismissed until a male cousin repeated them. You've walked through a market and heard someone mutter about your unnatural independence. You've seen men refuse to shake your hand because you didn't bring a male relative with you. But guess what? You didn't ask for permission. You inherited your estate. You fought for your boundary rights. You negotiated that sea trade agreement. You paid your taxes. You fed your household. And you didn't set a single barn on fire in the process. A quirky saga tale? One describes a woman so clever in court, so devastatingly accurate with her legal citations, that men began whispering she must be a vetter, a forest spirit in disguise. She was fined for defamation, then sued the men who called her unnatural, then won again. A local legend. You may be related, and yet the suspicion lingers. If you are too smart, you must be cursed. If you are too successful, you must be barren. If you are too independent, you must be dangerous. So what do? You lean into it, just a little. You keep a jar of ash and eggshells by your hearth. Let them wonder. You mark your livestock with runes that are entirely practical, but oddly shaped. Let them speculate. You tell stories in a flat voice and let silences linger longer than needed. Let them worry. Because if being called a troll is the price of uncompromising autonomy, you'll wear the title like a brooch. Tonight, after the visitor leaves, having failed to negotiate a grazing rights deal with your bewitched cows, you sit with your daughter by the fire. She asks if you really are magical. You wink. Only when I'm angry. Then you teach her how to calculate wool yield, how to recognize a liar in court, and how to tuck a contract under a floorboard without wrinkling the parchment because the world still doesn't know what to do with women like you, so you make them remember you, not with flames or curses, but with land ownership, ledger books, and a voice that doesn't shake. You are not a troll. You are not a witch. You are not too much. You are exactly the right amount for a woman who answers to no one. You pull your cloak tight as the morning fog settles low over the fields. Ahead, silhouetted against the milky gray light, are two figures bent over tools, laborers you hired last week. They nod when they see you, respectfully, carefully, because even though you don't hold a sword, and even though your boots aren't muddied by battle, you hold something more powerful, the right to own people, and you hate it. Let's be clear. You are a Viking woman with land, livestock, and contracts etched in runes. But along with your estate came something darker. Slaves. Not servants. Not seasonal help. Slaves. Enslaved men and women who work your fields, tend your herds, and clean your hearth in exchange for nothing, or very little. Maybe a scrap of autonomy, if you're generous. A mainstream fact. Slavery, called threldomr in Old Norse, was an entrenched institution in Viking society, spanning every class. Slaves were captured in raids, purchased at markets, or born into bondage. Women could own them, manage them, and even pass them on as part of dowries or inheritances. You don't remember the first time you saw one. Probably a girl your own age, standing barefoot in the snow, eyes fixed on the ground. As a child, you asked why she didn't speak. Your mother replied, "She's not like us." And that was that. But as you grew into your keys and contracts, you began to notice things. How the enslaved woman flinched when your uncle raised his voice. How no one listened when she fell sick. How her name was never recorded in the estate documents, just the thrall. And now, as a woman who understands the value of autonomy more than most, you find yourself tangled in a contradiction. Your freedom is built on the unfreedom of others. A quirky detail: some wealthy Norse women left manumission clauses in their wills, freeing slaves upon their own death. It was seen as a pious act, even noble. You're not waiting that long. You've already written 3 manumission contracts this year, quietly, without fanfare. Historians still argue about the treatment of Viking slaves. Some claim they were treated well, allowed to marry, even buy their freedom. Others point to sagas describing brutal beatings, forced labor, and humiliation. The truth lies, as it so often does, in uneven shadows. You've tried to set rules. You've given days of rest. You've allowed marriages. You've paid some with coin, or cloth, or rights to a small garden. But you know that reform is not abolition, and the system persists, whether you approve or not. You've even spoken against it at the thing, carefully, not to challenge the institution outright. You're not reckless, but to propose limits, protections, rights to buy freedom, inheritance for freed children. The men laughed. One asked if your ale had turned sour. You smiled, and then you out-argued him on a grain tax dispute in the same breath, but the unease stays with you. You see your laborers at dusk, bent over churns and tubs, skin cracked, voices soft. You think of your own hands, calloused but free. You wonder, can I be righteous in a crooked world? And the answer, maddeningly, is only a little. So you do what you can. You teach the children of slaves to read runes. You draft papers of partial freedom. You write land use clauses that quietly grant autonomy. You make it harder for your heirs to treat people like furniture. You shift the balance, grain by grain. And when you speak of power, your power, you acknowledge its cost. Tonight, as you inventory your winter stores, one of your freed workers returns from the woods with a cart of firewood. You nod. He nods. There's no need for thanks. He's been paid. He leaves. And you sit by the fire, staring into the flickering dark, wondering if the next generation will undo what your own has accepted. Because being a Viking woman with property isn't just about rights. It's about reckoning. And you will not look away. The firelight flickers across your face as you leaf through a weathered bit of parchment, an old saga, inked in long, looping runes. The names rise up like ghosts: Un the Deep-Minded, Theodhildr, Halgurdur Longlegs, women who, like you, left their mark not only in life, but in story. And that's the strange, powerful truth of your legacy. You're not just living history, you're becoming it. In the sagas, Viking women are many things: schemers, seers, seductresses, saints. But more than that, they're landholders, deal makers, and witnesses to power. A mainstream fact: women appear in the Icelandic family sagas with surprising frequency, often not just as background figures, but as active players in legal battles, feuds, and estate negotiations. Many are named, their words quoted verbatim, their actions recorded with admiration, irritation, or awe. And while these stories often exaggerate or romanticize, they preserve something true: the visibility of women in Viking society, especially when it came to property, law, and legacy. You've read your name in a boundary dispute record already, and it won't stop there. That old merchant who tried to trick you over the sheep price, his son will tell the tale for decades, how he got out haggled by that woman with the snake seal. Your neighbors have begun to refer to the path near your barley fields as her lane. It's not official yet, but you're not just showing up in records, you're showing up in memory. The skald who stayed with you last winter, he asked about your court victories. He jotted something down about your divorce speech and your barley yield. You shrugged it off, but you saw him smile as he stirred his ink. Might make a good verse, he said. You've become the kind of person who gets remembered, not for beauty or tragedy or war, but for competence, for tenure, for outlasting. And now, as the sagas shift from story to structure, your name might be carved into more than just contracts. You could become a benchmark, a precedent, the woman people invoke when they argue a case or draw a boundary, a quirky detail. One saga preserves an insult where a man says, "You talk like the widow of Westfield," a woman known for talking people out of land. It was meant as mockery. It became a compliment. You're building something similar. Every contract you sign, every land claim you win, every trade deal you close adds another thread to the woven narrative of your place. Not just your property, but your presence. And the younger women see it. You notice how they watch you when you speak at gatherings, how they stand a little straighter when they ask about loom weights or seed grain. One has even started keeping her own chest of rune sticks. You asked her why. "In case someone forgets what I said," she replied. You smiled. "That's your legacy. Not a tomb with gold, but a line in a saga, a boundary marker named after you, a court ruling that cites your grain yield as evidence. And perhaps, one night, long after you're gone, someone will sit where you sit now, staring into the fire, and hear a name mentioned. Your name. They won't know all the details, but they'll know enough. She was not easy. She was not silent. She did not lose. Tonight, you add one more piece to the story, a new contract, a new token, a new note, tucked into the chest, under your bed. Small things, but important. You look out at your land, the hills you fought for, the fence you rebuilt, the tenants you treated fairly, and you whisper to no one in particular, "Let them tell it right." You pull your shawl tighter as you walk through the village path, past homes that have changed hands, past fences you remember helping build when you were younger and faster. A boy waves, you wave back. He doesn't know that you once negotiated his grandfather out of half an acre and 3 pigs. You smile anyway, because time moves, and lately, you feel it, a shift in the wind, in the world, in the law. You've noticed the changes. The new priest is younger, more serious. He talks less about salvation and more about taxes. There are more men with iron rings and fewer women with keys. At the last thing, you weren't called to speak first. You weren't called at all. You don't panic. You've seen changes before, but this feels different. The tide is turning, and not in your favor. The new laws come slowly, wrapped in fine phrases like stability and God's order. They say land should pass through the male line to avoid confusion. That women may still manage property, but only under guidance. That widows should be advised by their sons. You look at your son. He's good with sheep, not so good with ledgers. A mainstream fact. As Norse societies became more centralized and Christianized in the 12th and 13th centuries, women's property rights began to erode. Laws changed. Inheritance rules shifted toward patrilineal systems. Women's roles in legal proceedings were reduced or restricted entirely. You feel it like a frostbite that starts in the toes. Your granddaughter asks why she doesn't have a key yet. You don't know what to say. She's 12, clever, sharper than you were at that age. But the law now says only sons inherit the family seat, unless the council grants exception. And the council is all men. Historians still argue whether these changes were absolute or uneven. Some communities resisted. Some women held on to influence through workarounds, loopholes, or sheer reputation. But over time, the customary flexibility hardened into exclusion. A quirky example: in one late 13th century record, a woman was denied inheritance not because she was unqualified, but because her voice carried too far in public. That's right, her voice was the problem. You still speak, but more carefully. You keep your accounts private now, tucked beneath floorboards. You teach your granddaughter to write, even if she has to do it in secret. You don't attend everything. You choose your battles, but you haven't disappeared. You've just adapted. You create trusts. You divide your land early. You assign grazing rights in advance and document everything thrice over. You use male proxies, cousins, nephews, but make sure they know exactly what to say. You whisper behind the throne, and you remind yourself, even if the laws forget you, the land remembers. That field, yours, that fence post, set by your hand, that tenant's cottage, built with your resources. They can write new scrolls, but they can't erase what stands in stone and soil. Still, it hurts. You watch your granddaughter's face when the priest praises her brother for understanding God's order. She doesn't speak, but her fingers drum on the table edge, just like yours did. Once. You lean over and whisper, "Start writing everything down, and don't stop." She nods, because you know this isn't just about law, it's about memory. When they erase your name from the record, you must make it echo elsewhere, in stories, in habits, in daughters who don't forget what power once felt like. Tonight, you sit alone with your ledgers. The candle burns low. You review old documents, double-check the numbers. You sharpen a stylus, draft a new agreement. You can't stop what's coming, but you can prepare the ground. Outside, the wind howls like a thing that remembers, and you whisper back, "I'm still here." The sun is low now, just a faint smear of amber across the hills. You walk the familiar path behind your longhouse, fingers brushing the stone fence you repaired 5 summers ago. The sheep barely glance up. They know you. This land knows you, and it knows that soon you'll be gone. You've felt it creeping in, softly, steadily. The hands ache more each morning. The stairs feel steeper. The words take longer to find when it's your turn to speak. But you're not afraid. You've planned for this the way you've planned everything else. Because when your time comes, you will die as you lived, with your keys on your belt and your affairs in perfect order. Your granddaughter watches closely now. She follows you as you inspect the fields, murmuring under her breath. She's memorizing boundary stones, learning the weight of a healthy fleece, practicing how to spot a lie at market. You see her touching her own belt more, as if imagining the keys that will one day hang there. You'll make sure she gets them. Your will is written, 3 copies, 1 buried, 1 burned into a rune staff, and 1 held by a witness who owes you a favor he'll never repay. The land will be divided fairly. The freed workers will stay freed. The contracts will stand. A mainstream historical fact. Some Viking women were buried with their keys, a symbol that, even in death, they remained guardians of household wealth and stability. Archaeologists still find them nestled beside brooches and spindle whorls, worn smooth by use and time. Your keys are ready. The big one opens the granary, the tiny one, the chest of contracts. One unlocks the tool shed, another the gate, and one you've kept hidden opens the old box beneath the floorboards, full of secrets no one else will ever need. You haven't forgotten the sagas. You've marked the stories that tell of women who vanish without record. You've made sure that won't happen to you. You've spoken at the thing. You've been named in 3 boundary disputes, 2 trade rulings, and one particularly juicy inheritance argument involving a stolen sheep and an illegal marriage. They won't forget you. A quirky detail? You've included a line in your will that your keys be hung on the central post of the house for 7 days after your death, so the household remembers who built it strong enough to last through 27 winters. Let the neighbors talk. Tonight, your granddaughter kneels beside you at the hearth. You hand her a piece of firewood and whisper, "Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth. You already know." She nods. You smile. And tomorrow, if the gods allow, you'll wake once more. But if you don't, that's all right too. Because the fences are solid. The granary is full. The deeds are signed. The land is yours. And it always knew your name. You rise one last time to stoke the fire. You hang your keys beside the hearth. And you rest. The longhouse is quiet now. The fire has settled into a soft glow, warm and steady. The night air is cool, but not cold. Outside, the sheep shift in their sleep. The trees whisper in the dark. You've walked through every field, checked every latch, counted every sack of grain. You've taught your daughters and nieces, your neighbors and granddaughters, how to balance a ledger, how to hold a line at the thing, how to speak with clarity and stand without apology. You've kept your contracts safe, your land intact, and your voice strong. And now, you can let go. There's nothing left to prove. No more boundary stones to inspect. No more taxes to dispute. No more sly merchants to outsmart. Though, given the chance, you'd still love to try. The legacy is there, in the soil, in the stories, in the keys, polished by years of touch, that now rest in another woman's hands. Let the world change. Let the priests rewrite the laws. Let the sagas grow dim in the corners. You were here, and the land remembers. So breathe slowly. Let the crackling fire lull you. And as your thoughts fade like mist over a morning fjord, know that you left behind more than grain or goats or gold. You left behind a name. End of script. Sweet dreams.